The steel deck echoed with laughter, but it wasn't the kind born of joy. It was cruel, sharp, meant to cut. A woman in a faded navy jacket stood near the edge, the ocean roaring below. Her hands rested on the railing, calm, steady, too steady, for someone surrounded by men pushing, mocking, daring her to fall. She doesn't belong here, one shouted. Dead weight, toss her over. Another sneered. They jeered louder, circling her like wolves. Someone shoved her shoulder. The railing shivered beneath her grip, and yet, she didn't flinch. She didn't plead. She didn't even speak. Why not? Who holds their ground with silence, when the sea itself is waiting to take them? That was the question burning in the air seconds before everything changed. The carrier came alive. Sirens howled across the deck. Radar systems, lit up in red, automated defenses swung toward the very sailors who had been mocking her. The crowd froze, faces drained pale. A voice thundered from the control tower. Identification confirmed. Priority call sign active. Confusion spread like wildfire. Why would a warship built to track missiles and planes respond to her? What kind of soldier must you be for steel and code to still remember your name? Long after people forgot, they thought they were shoving a nobody into the sea. But the ship knew the truth. It hadn't locked onto an intruder, it had recognized its own. The alarms faded as quickly as they came, but the silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Sailors stood frozen on the deck, their laughter gone, their bravado shattered. And in the middle of it all, the woman still stood with her hands resting on the railing, calm as if nothing had happened. Her eyes didn't gloat, her lips didn't curl into a smirk. She only stared out at the horizon, as if the ocean had more to say to her than the men ever could. They didn't understand her. They didn't want to. To them, she was still a stranger, an old figure wondering where she didn't belong. But whispers had already begun. Call signs don't just trigger a carrier. Not unless they belong to someone the ship itself was programmed. Never to forget. In the mess hall, the whispers turned into murmurs. Did you hear that? Systems locked onto her ID. That can't be real. Maybe it was a glitch. Glitch you think billion-dollar defense code just malfunctioned. They didn't speak it too loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Who is she? She didn't answer them. She ate quietly, pushed her tray away, and sat with her back straight, posture sharp, like the years hadn't bent her spine. Every movement carried discipline. Every breath felt like control. A few younger sailors laughed behind her back, calling her a fraud, a washed-up relic. But one or two watched closer. They noticed the scars on her hands, the way her boots still carried the wear of endless marshes, the faint line of an old injury that made her limp ever so slightly. They noticed her silence wasn't weakness, it was weight. And still, no one asked her directly. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. Maybe they thought silence meant surrender. But silence, for her, was a shield. She had carried it through darker nights than these men would ever know. The days passed like this. Every step she took on the carrier deck was watched, judged, whispered about. Some called her a stowaway, others a liar. She probably faked that call sign. One man spat when he thought she couldn't hear. Just a fluke in the system. Another shook his head, then explained why the entire ship nearly armed itself for her. No, brother, something's not right about her. Not right. They were correct about that. She didn't belong in their small world of shallow pride and easy disrespect. She had belonged to another world once. A world where the horizon was a battlefield, where the sound of engines roared louder than the ocean, where a single decision in the cockpit meant life or death for thousands. At night, she lay in the small bunk assigned to her. The ceiling hummed with the steady heartbeat of the carrier, and she closed her eyes, hearing echoes of another time. The roar of jet engines, the scream of alarms, the calm of her own voice calling out a heading, a vector, a strike pattern, her call sign cutting through chaos like a lifeline. They thought she was just a shadow now. They didn't know the ship, remembered because once years ago she had saved it. She remembered that day like it was etched into her blood. The skies were fire, enemy planes swarmed, and the fleet was vulnerable, spread thin, unprepared for the ambush. Her squadron was scattered, comms jammed, everything breaking apart. But she had stayed in the fight. She had flown her jet through a storm of missiles, weaving through fire, taking out the enemy one by one until the horizon was clear. Her fuel gauge was bleeding empty, her plane shaking with holes, but she had refused to quit. She'd called her final strike coordinates through the crackling comms, and when it was over, the carrier still stood. Thousands of lives had been saved because she refused to fall. The Navy had burned her call sign into the memory of that ship, a safeguard, a symbol. The machine itself was programmed to never forget her, and yet the men who now mocked her, they had no idea. The next morning, she walked the deck again. The sun rose golden, the wind sharp with salt. A group of young sailors blocked her path. "Tell us the truth," one demanded, stepping closer. "Who are you, really?" Some retired officer trying to play hero, his tone wasn't respectful, was mocking, daring her to slip. She only looked at him, calm as ever. Her silence unnerved him. He shoved her shoulder. "Say something," he barked. She didn't. She simply stepped around him, her pace steady, as if his push was no heavier than the breeze. That, more than anything, enraged him. Because nothing broke her calm, the disrespect grew bolder. At meals, they refused to sit near her, and drills, they mocked her movements, calling her ghost and pretender. But some sailors started to doubt the mockery. They had seen her eyes steady, unblinking, the kind of eyes that had stared down death before. They had seen the way she handled every insult, every shove, every challenge, not with weakness, with restraint, and the ship. The ship had remembered. Machines don't lie. One evening, as the sky bled crimson over the sea, she stood alone on the bow. The water stretched endless before her. Behind her, voices rose again, laughter, mockery. The same group that had shoved her before stepped closer, their courage bolstered by numbers. "Time to end this," one sneered. "The ocean will take care of her." They moved in. She didn't turn, didn't raise her hands, didn't speak. They pushed harder this time. She stumbled forward, her grip tightening on the railing. For a breath, the entire deck tilted into chaos. The ocean roared like it was hungry for her. But before they could finish what they started, ship answered again. Sirens screamed, turrets turned, warning tones ripped through the air. The entire carrier shifted, systems roaring to life as though it had sensed a threat greater than any missile. And again, the voice came, cold and final. Identification confirmed. Priority call sign active. The sailors froze. No more laughter, no more sneers, only fear. Because this wasn't a glitch. This was the ship itself protecting her, choosing her over them. They backed away, trembling, faces pale. She straightened her back, hands still resting on the rail, eyes fixed on the horizon. She never turned to look at them. She didn't need to. The ship had already spoken for her. That night, the whisper spread across every corner of the carrier. "She's someone, she has to be. No one gets a priority call sign unless, but she's just. No one finished the thought. Because none of them truly knew. But the ship knew. And deep down, they all felt it too. The silence after the alarms was heavy, but silence does not last long on a ship full of restless men. By the next morning, the rumors were running like fire across dry wood. Everyone had a version of the story, and none of them were the same. She hacked the system. No, she's a spy. Come on, man. She's too old for that. Probably just some retired pilot with a lucky ID card. Then why did the carrier arm itself? Why did the whole ship turn on us? Not her. No one had the answer, and she wasn't about to give it to them. She walked the halls the same way she walked the deckcom, steady, silent. If they spat insults, she ignored them. If they shoved, she held her footing. Her silence was sharper than words, and it cut their pride without her ever lifting a hand. But silence can also be dangerous. It leaves space for doubt, for fear. And fear, on a carrier full of young men desperate to prove themselves, can twist quickly into anger. They began testing her. Little games at first. Hiding her tray in the mess hall. Locking the hatch to her. Bunk 1 even poured his drink onto the seat beside her, forcing her to stand during a meal. She never complained. She never reported them. She simply carried on, eyes forward, spine straight. Some started to feel unsettled. They expected rage, or tears, or at least a demand for respect. But she gave them nothing, and the nothing haunted them. One afternoon, during a drill, she stood near the flight deck, watching the jets roar into the sky. Her eyes followed their paths with a strange familiarity, as though she knew each turn before it came. A young pilot caught her staring and laughed. "What's the matter, Grandma? Never seen a real takeoff before." His friends joined in, slapping his back, mocking her silence. But one of them noticed her lips moving, almost like she was whispering. Later he swore she was calling out their flight patterns seconds before they happened. He kept that detail to himself, afraid of what it might mean. The disrespect didn't stop there. In the gym, someone accidentally knocked her down with a barbell. In the corridor, she was shoved against the bulkhead more than once. At first, these were small humiliations, but soon they grew bolder. One night, a group cornered her in the hangar bay. "Tell us who you are," the leader demanded, blocking her path. "What's your trick? You think you can walk around here like you're untouchable? Say something. She only looked at him, her face unreadable. Her silence drove him mad. He grabbed her arm, shaking her. I said, talk. Before anyone could react, alarms shrieked through the hangar. The lighting shifted to red. Turrets above swiveled with a groan of steel. The men scattered, fear shooting through them like lightning. The grip on her arm loosened, and she stepped free without a word. Again, the voice came. Identification confirmed. Priority call sign active. Number 1 spoke. No one moved. The systems powered down slowly, the warning lights fading until the hangar looked normal again. But nothing was normal anymore. That night, whispers became theories. Some sailors believed she was a ghost, the spirit of a lost pilot the ship refused to forget. Others swore she was part of some secret program, a weapon in human form. A few even began to respect her, quietly stepping aside when she passed. But most just grew more afraid, and fear never stays quiet. The next days grew harsher. They didn't just mock her, now they challenged her. During training runs, they taunted her to join, daring her to prove herself. She ignored them, and their laughter echoed louder. They wanted her to break. They wanted to see what hid behind her silence. One bold sailor spread a rumor that her call sign was stolen, that she had taken it from a dead pilot. That's why she won't talk, he whispered, because if she does, the truth will come out. She's a fake. The ship just can't tell the difference. The rumor grew teeth. Soon, men whispered it in corners, spat it across the mess hall, muttered it as she walked by. Fake, thief, imposter. One evening, when the sun bled red across the sea, the tension snapped. A group of men cornered her near the deck again. Same spot where it had all begun. This time, there were more of them. Too many. Their voices were loud, their faces twisted with pride and anger. You don't belong here, one barked. Admit it, you're nothing but a fraud. Take that jacket off, you don't deserve it. They surrounded her, circling like predators. She stood at the rail, her back to the endless sea. The wind tore at her hair, the waves crashed below, but her face never moved, calm, silent, waiting. One of them shoved her, harder than before. Her grip tightened on the steel rail. The crowd laughed, louder this time, but shaky around the edges. Because deep down, even as they mocked her, they remembered the alarms. They remembered the turrets. They remembered how the ship itself seemed to protect her still. Pride is a dangerous fuel, and pride blinded them now. Throw her over, someone shouted, voice breaking with a mix of fear and cruelty. Hands moved, boots scraped. The mob pressed closer, and for a terrible second, it seemed certain the ocean would take her. But the carrier had other plans. Sirens wailed, deafening. Red lights bathed the deck. Defense systems roared alive, turrets locking on the mob with mechanical precision. The sound was unmistakable. The ship, preparing to fire on its own crew. Panic erupted. Men stumbled back, shouting, eyes wide with terror. No one dared move closer. The voice thundered once more, cutting through wind and chaos. Identification confirmed. Priority call sign active. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The ship had spoken for her. This time, the silence after the alarms was different. It wasn't confusion, it was fear. And in that fear grew something else. A question. Annoying, burning question that spread through every sailor on that carrier. Who was she really? Because machines don't lie. The red glow washed over the deck like fire, the alarms cutting through the night air. Sailors froze in place, hands trembling, breath shallow. The ship's weapons didn't move, didn't waver. They were locked onto them, onto the very men who had been moments from throwing her overboard. And through the chaos, she stood unshaken. Her hands still rested on the cold railing, her face toward the horizon, her silence as steady as the sea. Boots thundered against steel. Officers stormed onto the deck, shouts cutting through the alarm. Stand down. What the hell is going on here? Their eyes darted between the armed turrets, the frozen mob, and the woman at the edge. The voice from the control tower roared. Again, identification confirmed. Priority call sign, Valkyrie 1. The words hit like a hammer. Gasps spread across the deck. Eyes widened, mouths fell open. Everyone had heard the stories in training, whispered like legend. Valkyrie 1, the phantom pilot, the woman who flew missions no one else survived. The call sign etched into history books, but with no face to match. The ship hadn't glitched, it hadn't malfunctioned. It had recognized its own savior. The officer in charge turned pale, his voice cracking. That call sign is restricted. It's supposed to be retired. He stepped closer to her, but cautiously, as though approaching something more than human. Ma'am, is it true? Finally, for the first time, She spoke. Her voice was quiet but sharp, carrying across the deck like steel cutting through fog. I flew when others couldn't. I stayed when others fled. That ship remembers because I never left it behind. Her words sliced the air, no bravado, no boasting, only truth, spoken by someone who had nothing left to prove. One of the younger sailors stumbled forward, eyes wide, voice trembling. You were Valkyrie 1. The stories, the missions. He couldn't finish. His throat tightened under the weight of realization. The officer straightened his back, his expression shifting from shock to shame. Then, slowly, he raised his hand to his brow. The salute was sharp, respectful, absolute. Silence swept the deck. One by one the sailors followed, their pride broken, their arrogance crumbling into dust. Salutes rose across the carrier, the very men who had mocked her now standing stiff with respect. And she didn't bask in it, she didn't gloat. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, her posture steady, as if the sea still mattered more than their repentance. The officer lowered his hand, his voice carried over the hushed crowd. This ship was built to honor her call sign. It remembers what she did when the rest of us forgot. She's not a ghost. She's not a fraud. She is Valkyrie 1, our protector, our legend, and you will treat her as such. No one dared breathe. The shame was suffocating. The men who had pushed, mocked, humiliated now stood powerless, their cruelty exposed against the truth of who she was. She turned then, finally facing them. Her eyes met theirs, not with anger, not with pride, but with a quiet weight that made their throats tighten. Her silence was no longer a mystery, it was judgment, and in that moment they understood. Respect is not demanded, it is earned, carved and sacrificed in silence, etched into the memory of steel and sky. The carrier itself had remembered her when men had not, and now, the truth could no longer be denied. The alarms went quiet. The turrets withdrew, the ship returned to its steady hum, the sea stretching endlessly beneath the stars. But the silence on deck was different now. It wasn't cruel, or mocking, or loud with laughter. It was the silence of men who had finally seen what stood before them. She remained by the railing, her hands steady, her eyes on the horizon. She didn't need their salutes. She didn't need their apologies. Respect was never something she chased, it was something she carried, carved into her bones from battles they would never know. The younger sailors shifted uncomfortably, their pride broken under the weight of shame. Some lowered their heads. Others stole quick glances at her, searching her face for something: anger, forgiveness, a word. But she gave them nothing. She had already given enough, because some people don't need to speak to tell their story. Their silence speaks louder than any voice, their scars shout louder than any accusation, their call signs echo louder than any insult. She turned finally, her boots striking steel, as she walked past the men who had once mocked her. None dared move, none dared speak. They stepped aside, saluting quietly, the weight of their mistake pressing down harder than the sea below, and in her silence they learned that honor isn't in the medals pinned to your chest. It isn't in the loud voices demanding attention. It isn't even in the salute itself. Honor is in the sacrifice made long before the world noticed, in the battles fought when no one was watching, in the steady gaze of someone who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. The carrier had remembered her when they had not. Machines do not feel, but machines do not forget. The steel of that warship had honored her name, while flesh and blood had failed. And that was the lesson etched into the deck that night. If even a ship could carry gratitude, then surely men could too. As the waves pounded endlessly against the hull, the truth settled deep in every sailor's chest. They had not stood in the presence of a ghost. They had stood in the presence of a legend who chose to live quietly, away from glory, away from the weight of fame. She was Valkyrie 1, and she had nothing left to prove. Some men ask for respect, others demand it, but the greatest carry it, silently, letting their actions speak long after the battles are over. She walked into the night without a word, the sea wind tugging at her jacket, the ship's heartbeat steady beneath her feet. And though the deck was filled with men who once scorned her, all they could do now was watch and salute. Because when the world forgets, memory still lives on in the steel of the carrier and in the silence of those who earned it. Stories like hers remind us that honor doesn't fade with time. It lives on in the silence, in the sacrifice, and in the respect we choose to give. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it so others remember the names and faces that history too often forgets. Subscribe so you never miss the stories of courage and sacrifice that deserve to be told. And leave a comment below, because your voice, your respect, and your remembrance matter. Every salute, every word, of honor, every memory carried forward. It all adds up. Together we can make sure no hero ever stands forgotten on the deck of history.